Spirit Airlines is in deep trouble. It just filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, the second time it's done so in the past 10 months. That alone is a bad sign, but what's even worse is that leadership has expressed doubt that it'll still be flying this time next year. Suffice it to say, this is a mighty fall from grace for what was once the fastest growing airline in the States. Now, some people might be celebrating Spirit's demise, or at least they're not shedding a tear. The airline's been a punching bag, with many decrying its poor passenger experience. But here's the truth. Spirit is way more important to the airline industry than you might think. And if Spirit doesn't survive this rocky period, travelers across the country are going to feel it, and not in a good way. Let me explain. Now, one of the main gripes with flying Spirit is that people don't always know what they're buying. Sure, you get a cheap fare, only to realize later that you've got to pay for a whole lot more on board. The internet works in much the same way. We all think of it as this amazing free resource, but you're actually paying for it with your data. Most of us have no idea just how much of our personal details, like names, addresses, phone numbers, etc., are floating around online. And that information is quietly being scooped up and sold by data brokers, which is a big reason why you're probably getting a lot of those spam and scam texts. That's why I use Delete Me, today's sponsor. It's a hands-free service that finds and removes your personal info from hundreds of these shady sites. When I first signed up, I got a full privacy report that showed me exactly where my info was found. And the problem was way worse than I thought. But thanks to Delete Me, all of that data is actively being scrubbed on my behalf, and I don't have to lift a finger. If you're fed up with all of the spam you're getting, then I suggest having Delete Me in your corner. And if you go to joindeleteme.com/KobeExplains and use the code KobeExplains at checkout, you'll get 20% off. Thanks to Delete Me for sponsoring today's video, and now let's get back to it. First, let's survey the landscape of US airlines today. Broadly speaking, you can split it into three camps. First, you have the legacy carriers, United, Delta, and American. These airlines operate out of major hubs, fly a diverse set of missions, and often focus on the premium experience. Second, you have low-cost carriers, or LCCs. These include the likes of Alaska, JetBlue, and Southwest, who started out by offering affordable fares, but have added more perks over the years. Then, you have ultra-low-cost carriers, or ULCCs. These include airlines like Allegiant, Frontier, and Spirit, and they are very different from their upmarket competitors. And the name is pretty self-explanatory. A ULCC does whatever it can to drive fare prices down. Now, this kind of airline has been around for quite some time, but not in the US. In the 80s and 90s, European airlines like Ryanair and EasyJet popularized the model, but it didn't arrive in the States until 2007, when Spirit, who was established 15 years earlier, made a hard pivot to the cost-cutting model. The likes of Frontier followed shortly thereafter. Now, at first, Spirit's new business model was really well received. It rose to prominence in the wake of the financial crisis, when many Americans were losing jobs. As folks were tightening their belts, they jumped at their ultra-cheap fares, which in some cases were as low as $9. And as a result, Spirit was able to grow rapidly, but they may have grown too quickly. As the recession faded and consumer confidence returned, fewer travelers needed these ultra-cheap prices. And while Spirit now had a sizable fleet and network, many of its customers were no longer willing to put up with the airline's significant trade-offs. And if you know anything about Spirit, you'll know that those trade-offs are aplenty. For instance, seats aboard Spirit are amongst the tightest in the US, at 28 inches of pitch. That's 2 to 4 inches less than other US carriers. Plus, the seats are ultra thin and have hardly any padding. But by far the biggest issue that people take with Spirit's offering is its hidden fees. In exchange for your cheap ticket, you'll have to pony up for things like a carry-on, seat selection, meals, heck, even a printed boarding pass. Because of that, Spirit's earned a reputation for nickeling and diming its customers. Now, today, consumer sentiment and spending is way stronger than it was in the early 2010s. So, fewer and fewer people are tolerant of these trade-offs, and they're turning away from the airline. This has left Spirit with an average load factor of 79%, which is well below the industry average. Now, this steady decline in passenger volume has unfortunately come during a period of rising cost. Spirit operates the youngest fleet in the US, and its average jet is less than half the age of those flown by the legacy carriers. And that youth is a major necessity. In order to keep fares low while still turning a profit, Spirit needs to minimize fuel burn and maintenance. Flying a super modern fleet should, in theory, do exactly that. But this strategy is backfiring. More than half of Spirit's fleet is comprised of the all-new Airbus A320 and A321neo, all of which are powered by Pratt & Whitney's GTF engine. While the GTF is super efficient, it's also been plagued by manufacturing defects that have triggered a massive global recall. Because of this, Spirit's been forced to ground as many as 40 jets at a time. This has hurt aircraft utilization, driven up maintenance costs, and cut deeply into revenue. And while Pratt has admittedly compensated the airline, giving them about $150 million, this doesn't come close to covering the full cost of the impact. Now, these compounding issues forced the airline to file for bankruptcy in November of 2024. This allowed them to restructure their debt and get a fresh injection of capital. But the relief was short-lived. Just 2 quarters later, it posted a massive net loss of $257 million. This forced it to file for bankruptcy again just last month. And now, leadership is casting doubt on the entire operation, saying there's a real possibility that the airline won't survive the next 12 months. Now, I don't know about you, but my initial gut reaction is good riddance. Nobody is going to shed a tear for Spirit and its awful product. In fact, some might find it as a vindication of sorts, proof that companies who don't prioritize the customer are doomed to fail. But after thinking through it a little bit more, I actually think that's the wrong way of looking at this. Sure, flying Spirit isn't fun, and I would never go out of my way to fly them. But its existence is absolutely a net positive for the American consumer. That's because the airlines caused major disruption in 3 different ways, and those disruptions have impacted every American flyer, whether you've actually traveled with Spirit or not. Hey folks, from the flight deck here. We've reached our cruising altitude on this video, so I'm gonna go ahead and turn off that fasten seatbelt sign. You're free to move about the cabin, but I recommend keeping those like and subscribe buttons engaged while you're in your seat. Enjoy the ride and let us know if there's anything we can do for you down in the comments. First of all, Spirit has put real pricing pressure on its peers. Spirit was the first US airline to acknowledge that not everyone needs amenities like a checked bag or onboard snacks. But for most of history, airfares have had these extras baked in whether you wanted them or not. Spirit decided to unbundle, giving customers more options on what they were actually buying. Sure, this can give the perception that you're being nickel and dimed, but in the vast majority of cases, flying with Spirit is still significantly cheaper than the competition, even with many supplemental fees tacked on. And when you're just buying the base fare and nothing else, forget about it, it's not even a contest. That pricing advantage was validated earlier this year, when Spirit was ranked the #1 most affordable US airline of 2025. Now, this pricing pressure has forced Spirit's competitors to do a couple of things that have benefited you and I. 1, they've had to decrease fares themselves, and 2, they've started to unbundle as well. They're not doing this because they want to. If they could get away with it, they'd bundle everything together and charge you the maximum possible price. But when Spirit started siphoning away customers, they recognized the need for a pivot. If Spirit goes away, these mainliners will have one fewer competitor to keep them in check. and fares will almost certainly rise again. The second major benefit that Spirit brought about is improved connectivity. Because of the nature of its business, the airline had to get really creative when building its network. If they flew into places where competition was already fierce, it would erode their pricing advantage and eat into profits. So, they've built their network around secondary cities and airports. This includes popular leisure destinations like Myrtle Beach, Fort Lauderdale, and Las Vegas, markets that are often deprioritized by full-service carriers since they don't see as much premium demand. And in the bigger cities, Spirit's often chosen to fly into minor or underserved airports like Newark, Baltimore, and Oakland. Now, for those people who actually live near a major hub, navigating Spirit's network can be a hassle. But for millions of Americans, these gateways are critical. They give vacationers a cheap and efficient way to reach their holiday, and they provide far better connectivity to those living outside the biggest metro centers. If Spirit collapses, these gateways are going to lose a major source of stimulus. Whenever Spirit flies into a secondary market, it'll bring a steady stream of traffic into those communities. So should they pull out, that means fewer visitors will come. And for those who do still choose to visit, well, now they'll have to fly on a more expensive carrier. That means they'll have less money to spend at shops, restaurants, and hotels. The third and final way that Spirit benefits all American consumers is through its handling of noise and the environment. It's not a secret that aircraft are dirty. They are a major source of pollution. But Spirit's fleet is better than most. Like I mentioned before, Spirit's fleet is amongst the youngest in the US. Now, having such a young and efficient fleet definitely reduces operating costs, but it also has a secondary effect. It reduces noise and air pollution at near-airport communities. As the demand to fly continues to rise, these communities are being more and more impacted, but Spirit's fleet has helped keep those pollutants in check. This isn't something they get a lot of credit for, but the impact is very real. These three variables, lower cost, better connectivity, and lower environmental footprint, will be lost if Spirit can't survive. So that obviously raises the question of, what can they do to weather the storm? Well, I don't want to sugarcoat it. They are in a very, very tricky spot. Again, their CEO has said they have less than 12 months to turn things around. That's not nearly enough time to implement major structural changes to the business. All the airline can really do at this point is try to stretch their resources as much as they can. And well, they're certainly trying. So far, they've cut service to 11 underperforming cities. They've furloughed 270 pilots, and they've sold dozens of its aircraft and returned many more to its lessors, which has slashed its total fleet size by a factor of 2. Hopefully, this will give them enough financial runway to chart a new path forward. If Spirit is lucky enough to survive the short term, it may need to rethink its identity altogether, following in the footsteps of Southwest, JetBlue, and other low-cost carriers that have moved upmarket in pursuit of higher-margin passengers. We're already seeing hints of that shift, with Spirit more aggressively promoting its big front seat, its pseudo-business class product. But actually being able to reach that pivot point is going to be anything but easy. Ultimately, I think we should all be rooting for Spirit here, which I know sounds crazy. How could you root for an airline that, frankly, nobody likes? But its collapse won't benefit you and I. It'll only benefit the legacy carriers. Without Spirit, they'll have less reason to compete. And that's not great news for consumers like us. So what do you guys think? Have you actually flown on Spirit yourselves? And would you be sad to see them go? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section below. Thank you so much to my patrons for helping to make this video possible. If you like what I do and want to help the channel grow, go ahead and check out this link right here. As always, if you learned something new today, leave a like and subscribe to keep learning. And until I see you again, don't forget to look up.